Greetings. My name is Mark Amado Pinkham, and now I'm the director of the Order and Mystery School of the Seven Rays. I'll be your host during this presentation on the Gardens of the Dragons. We in the Order and Mystery School of the Seven Rays are dedicated to bringing you complete and easy to understand video presentations such as this one that, as accurately as possible, reveals the true history of the human race on Earth, much or most of which has been destroyed or hidden. If you would like to be alerted of any new videos we produce, please click on the subscribe button below and ring the bell. In this video presentation, I will offer you information from my two books, The Return of the Serpent's Wisdom and An Initiate's Guide to the Path of the Dragon. Much or most of this information you will not find except in my books, both of which are synthesis of esoteric history gathered from many sources over 40 years. In this video, I will present the history of the many Gardens of Edens that have covered the planet over the ages, each of which was manifested at the beginning of a major cycle of time. Now, these Edens are also known as the Gardens of the Dragons because the teachers who taught the humanity destined to exist in each new cycle are known as serpents and dragons. The image on your screen reveals the location of many of these Gardens of the Dragons worldwide. In previous videos, I have presented the history of a universal king who arrived on Earth thousands and possibly even millions of years ago and became both the savior of humanity and the king of the world. The Hindus currently refer to this monarch as Sanat Kumara. The ancient Atlanteans knew him as Neptune. The Sumerians knew him as Enki. And the Egyptians knew him as Ptah Osiris, and the Greeks knew him as Dionysus. The Hopis know him as Lord of the World, Masao, and the Middle Eastern Gnostics knew him as the serpent on the tree. All these kings of the world, according to the Zedis of northern Iraq, were different manifestations of their patron deity, the peacock angel, whom they claim has 1,001 forms and names. Now, although each version of the universal king you see on your screen had its own unique form, each one manifested in their own Garden of Eden as the serpent on the tree. The first Garden of the Dragons I'll introduce is that of Atlantis. Greek legends that refer to the Atlantean Garden of the Dragons as the Garden of the Hesperides maintain that it was indeed the home of a serpent on the tree, which they called Aladdin. They claimed guarded the golden apples of wisdom that grew on the tree. According to other traditions, such as that of the Native American tribes who claimed to have come from Atlantis, the serpent on the tree in the Atlantean Garden of the Dragons was a form of Neptune. They claim that trident-wielding Neptune manifested both as the fire serpent who lived underground and within volcanoes, as well as the king of the sea. In his underworld manifestation, he was Poseidon, the earth shaker, whose form as the earth's serpentine kundalini constantly changed the face of the earth. And in his manifestation as king of the sea, Neptune was an earthly reflection of the primal dragon that emerged out of the primal sea of consciousness at the beginning of time and then created the universe. Thus, Neptune was lord of both land and sea and king of the entire world. Neptune's entourage of teachers in the Atlantean Garden of the Dragons were serpent masters in the order of the Kabiri. The members of the Kabiri, which is a term meaning those of fire, were alchemists and enlightened adepts that lived near volcanoes on Atlantis and summoned the power and wisdom of Neptune during their experiments and rituals. Many had arrived with Neptune from the Pleiades and Venus, which is the planet whose symbols adorn Neptune's crown. Venus and the Pleiades are identified as being the traditional origins of all manifestations of the ancient king of the world around the globe. The Venusian crown, you can see on the right side of your slide, the Venusian crown is in the shape of a volcano, which, as I mentioned, is the home of Neptune. The feathers that arise from its apex represent the plumes of smoke that rise from a volcano. Now, the fiery aspect of Neptune was also represented by the people of Atlantis as a fiery he-goat. And later, when Atlantean missionaries of Neptune left the motherland, they did so aboard ships with Neptune's goat head attached to their prows. When they left Atlantis, they traveled both east and west in their sea-goat vessels. And where they went from Atlantis is represented by the red lines on your slide. Some expeditions that went east were destined for Egypt. This was a land that had been colonized before the Great Flood by alchemical adepts of the Atlantean Kabiri order. They were known as the Thoth Hermes Masters. In order to save much of the wisdom of the pre-flood era for the humanity that was going to emerge after the flood, these enlightened masters constructed the Great Pyramid of Giza, as well as other temples at Thebes in the middle of the country. Following the flood, certain parts of Egypt, including Giza and Thebes and Hermopolis, served as gardens of the dragons. The serpent on the tree of Giza was the universal king in his form of Ptah Osiris. When the Atlanteans arrived in Egypt, Neptune morphed into Ptah Osiris, and his goat became the goat god Pan. These were two of the first deities of the country. Like Neptune, in Giza and its associated city of Memphis, Ptah Osiris was venerated as the fire god whose twin sons were the Kabiri twins. And the goat form of Neptune eventually morphed into the fiery goat of Mendes, later to be known as Baphomet, and an embodiment of the Kundalini. Other expeditions that left Atlantis before the flood traveled around Africa to the Persian Gulf and up the Tigris-Euphrates rivers, where they constructed the city of Eridu, the city of sea-goat Enki. They arrived in sea-goat vessels dedicated to Neptune, who in Eridu became known as Enki. Like his Atlantean predecessor, Enki was also king of both land and sea. Legend has it that Enki, the savior of humanity, alerted Zuisandra, the Sumerian Noah, of the impending flood that was to destroy humanity and had him build an ark. He also had Zuisandra store some alchemical text on human immortality in the pre-flood city of Sippar. Now, after the cataclysm, Zuisandra retrieved those texts, and then Enki blessed him with immortality for the service that he had provided for the earth and humanity during the flood. Following the flood, some ships of refugees of the Kabiri order from Atlantis entered the newly formed Mediterranean Sea and sailed to some of its islands for colonization. Among the islands they settled upon was Malta, where they built alchemical temples, and also the volcanic island of Samothrace, where they constructed shrines and temples dedicated to the order of the Kabiri and its patrons, the Kabiri twins. For thousands of years, aspiring seekers of wisdom would sail to Samothrace for special initiation into the order of the Kabiri. Samothrace also became a seat of the refugee Amazons, who had been alchemists on Atlantis and closely associated with the Kabiri. On Samothrace, they built a shrine to their deity Hecate, who was a personification of the Kundalini. And then on Lemnos, another volcanic island near Samothrace, the Amazons created a colony and a shrine for Neptune in his form of Vulcan, the smith god who lives in volcanoes. Some Atlantean ships also docked at Greece in the Peloponnese and then traveled inland to what is now Arcadia. There they founded the Garden of the Dragons, featuring the universal king as Dionysus, whose forms included the Kundalini's serpent and his alter ego, the goat god Pan. Some ships of Atlantean refugees sailed west from their destroyed motherland and eventually arrived along the coast of what is now the state of Veracruz in Mexico. They arrived in ships covered in snakeskin and sailed up the Panuca River until they found the perfect location for a city. There they built the temple city of Tamoanchan, which is a name meaning the place where the people of the serpent landed. This became the Garden of the Dragons for Middle America at the beginning of the era following the planetary flood. The image on your screen of the tree that has a human emerging out the top of it is a traditional image of the Garden of Tamoanchan. The serpent on the tree of Tamoanchan was Quetzalcoatl, the plume serpent, and the teachers of this Eden were also known as Quetzalcoatls. In the years that followed the construction of Tamoanchan, expeditions were sent out throughout Middle America to found new civilizations. Eventually, these expeditions contributed to the creation of the civilizations known as the Olmecs and the Maya and the Toltecs. The Quetzalcoatls have participated in founding the Olmecs' capital city of what is now La Venta, constructed an artificial volcano from volcanic rocks they brought from the Tuxtla Range 60 miles away. This edifice, which you can see on the lower left side of the screen, became a replica of the volcanoes on Atlantis that the Olmec ancestors had venerated as homes of Neptune. Among the Olmecs, they became homes of Quetzalcoatl. In the Toltec capital of Teotihuacan, the Quetzalcoatls from Tamoanchan oversaw the construction of a great temple city. The largest of their temples was the pyramidal temple of the sun, whose base measurement was almost identical to that of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And the sacred temple there was the temple of Quetzalcoatl, whose outer walls were ornamented with images of the plume serpent. Another garden of the dragons was Serendib, which is the ancient name of the island of Sri Lanka. At the time it was a garden of the dragons, Sri Lanka was part of the great Pacific continent known as Mu, Lemuria, and Komati Kingdom. According to the legend of the Sri Lankans, during the time their island was Serendib, God placed Adam at the top of a 7,000-foot peak that they now refer to as Adam's Peak. And you can see Adam's Peak on the top right side of your screen. Adam then climbed down Adam's Peak and kept walking until he reached a place that is now known as Katragama, the place of Kartikeya. This is a name for Sanat Kamara, which means son of the Pleiades. According to many Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims, this was the site of the original Garden of Eden that's mentioned in the Bible. It was here that the Eden scenario unfolded and Sanat Kamrat took the form of the serpent on the tree. To the lower left of your screen is the entrance today into Ketergama. And to the right of that is a manifestation of Sanat Kamrat in his boy form, his king boy form, forever young boy form, as well as his form as the peacock and the serpent. The dragons of the Eden of Serendib were Sanat Kamrat's entourage of star people and disciples that were known as both serpents and siddhas, meaning perfected masters. Some groups of siddhas were eventually led from Serendib by Agastya, one of the premier disciples of Sanat Kamrat, and he led them northward into South India. Now, the map on the screen shows Sri Lanka as part of Lemuria and united to South India. At that time, it was part of the Pandyan kingdom, where legend has it that Agastya was a great teacher and the creator of the Tamil language. In South India, Agastya settled in what is now known as the Pathagai Hills. And from there, he sent his Siddha disciples around India to found their own schools of yoga. Among them was the Siddha Babaji, who founded Kriya Yoga, and the Siddha Gorakhnath, who founded the school of Hatha Yoga. In the image to the right on the screen in the center is Agastya, and around him are images of the Siddhas. Another group of dragons who left the Serendib were the Mandaeans. This is a name meaning the Gnostics. Among them were Siddha adepts known as Nasarai or Serpents. Now they traveled west and merged with the Sumerians, the Persians, the Egyptians, and finally with the Jewish Essenes, with whom they founded the sect of the Nazarenes, which is another name meaning serpents. Within this branch of the Essenes was born John the Baptist, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and John the Apostle. John the Baptist, whom the Mandaeans refer to as their last great prophet, was an embodiment of the power and wisdom of Sanat Kamrat. He founded a lineage of enlightened serpent masters known as the Johannites that moved the power of the serpent of the tree down a long line of adepts, all of whom were named John, which is a title related to the Sanskrit Yan that means he of Gnostic power and wisdom. During the time of the First Crusade, the holder of the office of John was settled in Jerusalem. He transferred the power of the Johannite lineage at that time to Hugh de Payan, the first Grand Master of the Templars. From that point onwards, the Templars were the guardians of the power and wisdom of the serpent on the tree that had originated on Serendib. This was the true Holy Grail the knights had vowed to protect. Directly north from Sri Lanka along the 81st parallel is Mount Kailash. This is another garden of the dragons that is also associated with the universal king of the world in his form of Sanat Kamrat. The garden of Mount Kailash is mentioned in the Hindu Puranas as having been at the very center of the earth and populated by siddhas, elves, and other magical, enlightened, and interdimensional beings. It has thus been equated with Tolkien's Middle-earth that was populated by elves. In other texts of the East, Mount Kailash is referred to as both Mount Meru, the legendary mount that unites the higher dimensions with Earth, as well as the universal tree that the mythical serpent slithers down into the planetary Garden of Eden. As a manifestation of the serpent on the tree, Mount Kailash emanates the life force that assists in keeping Earth healthy and prosperous. It also does this by assuming the form of the gigantic Shiva Lingam, which is the symbol of Shiva and Shakti, the universal male and female principles that unite together as the life force. The personification of the life force is their son, Sanat Kumara. So Mount Kailash is indeed a symbol of Sanat Kumara. The tribes that emerged from the area of Mount Kailash were led by enlightened serpents or dragons. Amongst these tribes were the Persians and their cousins, the Sakas or the Scythians, who flew the dragon banner. The name Sakas denotes those of power. They were the leaders and the elves of the Mount Kailash Garden of the Dragons. The Sakas or Shakyas moved south and colonized much of North India and what is now Nepal. In their country of Kapilavastu was born Buddha, the Shakyamuni. Those tribes of the Shakyas or the Scythians that moved west are on your screen. You can see them indicated by the Scythian roots in red. Other branches of the Scythians, who conquered most of Central and Western Asia before pushing into Europe, they include the Germanic and Northern European tribes and families who were associated with the dragon and wielded magical powers. One of them existed in Ireland as the magical Tuatha De Danann. In other parts of Europe, the Scythians spawned dragon families and dragon orders. Dragon families were the De Veres and the Lusignans and Luxembourgs, all of whom were descended from the Scythian princess Melusine. In Eastern Europe, they became the dragon families known as the Basarab, which is the family of Vlad III or Dracula, as well as the Bathories, the Narcooses, which is the family of Saint Germain. All these families were members of the Order of the Dragon founded by the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund, who was a scion of the House of Luxembourg. Now, the last Garden of the Dragons I will mention is one that occurred in what is now Sedona, Arizona, and the Hopi Mesas. The entire area of the American Southwest that is enclosed in the circle on your screen in this map, that entire area is a giant vortex of energy that serves as the root chakra of Earth. At one time, that whole entire area was Hopi land. Before and after the Great Flood, star people from other star systems and planets who had been residing on Lemuria, they came to colonize this region. Some of them accompanied the Hopis that had resided on Mu. Many of them converged in the area of what is now Sedona, where a temple city known in the records of the Hopis as Palatquapi, the Red Place, had been built by star people in a previous cycle. Within this city was the court and throne of the leader of the star people and universal king of the world that the Hopis refer to in their legends as Masao. Palatquapi became a garden of the dragons where the star people taught many tribes that were destined to populate the planet in what is now known as the fourth world of time. Many of those tribes who converged on Palatquapi after the planetary flood did so after emerging from inside the Earth, where they had retreated to in order to survive the planetary deluge. These included many of the Hopis and the tribes of the Navajos and Zunis and the Yavapai. Legend had it that they and other tribes from all over the Americas that had survived the flood traveled to Palatquapi for instruction from the star people. Eventually, those dragon missionaries that emerged from these gardens of the dragons around the world, they migrated to powerful vortexes or dragon layers on the planetary grid, and there they founded dragon kingdoms over which they ruled as dragon kings. Many of them you can see on the map in front of you. So together, these dragon kingdoms came together as one wide world dragon culture. The wide world dragon culture can and will be covered in detail in another video. Now, if you would like to learn more about the Gardens of the Dragons, which is the information that's provided from this video was taken from my two books, The Return of the Serpents of Wisdom and An Initiate's Guide to the Path of the Dragon. And you can receive an autographed copy of each if you go to the website address below. And for those of you who would like to visit Sedona and see the remains of Pilot Coffee, I'm now offering a City of the Star People tours. In order to get more information about these tours, please go to the website address at the bottom of this slide. Thank you for watching this video on the Gardens of the Dragon. Please check out our other videos at the web address below.